So many people here. I'm Les Jacobs. I'm Vice President Research and Innovation at Ontario Tech, and this event is one of many that we have been doing in both involving the IAEA Collaborating Centre and various faculties in the university, and of course, crucially, in this case, students played a very fundamental role in the organizing of it and the leadership on it. And so I'll begin with having Morgan come and do the land acknowledgements.
Thank you so much. Hi, welcome everybody. So for those of you who are joining us internationally, in order to start an event in a good way, we typically begin with a land acknowledgement. And this is very important to recognize where we are and where we come from. And I want to welcome you also all here to Shawendjige Winning Hall, which is a place of friendship and kindness, and we are so happy to have you here. So Ontario Tech University acknowledges the lands and peoples of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. We're thankful to be welcomed on these lands in friendship. The lands are situated and covered under the Williams Treaties and the traditional territory of the Mississaugas, a branch near the Greater Anishinaabe Nation, including Algonquin, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. These lands remain home to a number of Indigenous nations and people. We acknowledge this land out of respect for the Indigenous nations who had cared for Turtle Island, also called North America, from before the arrival of settler peoples until this day. Most importantly, we remember the history of these lands has been tainted by poor treatment and a lack of friendship with First Nations who call them home. The history is something we are all affected by, as we are all treaty people here in Canada under the Dish with One Spoon Wampum. We all have a shared history to reflect on, and each of us defines our present. But if we move forward as friends and allies, then it does not have to define our future. Thank you so much, and I'll bring you back. Yes.
Thank you, Morgan. Just briefly, nuclear hydrogen is such a terrific topic for Ontario Tech because it brings together two of our core research strengths. We have, of course, and you'll hear more about this in a moment from the President, we have a unique nuclear engineering program. We have a unique NSERC industrial chair program in nuclear. We have very unique research facilities, and we continue to heavily invest in them. We also host Canada's International Atomic Energy Collaborating Centre. So there are many points in which we're leaders, and that I think is probably familiar to many of you here. But also, because we have the Clean Energy Research Lab, we are the country's leading research facility in hydrogen research. Two of the researchers, Ibrahim Dinser and Mark Rosen, are the two most cited energy researchers in Canada, and in the case of Professor Dinser, is fifth in the world in general in energy and the top cited hydrogen researcher in the world. It is a powerhouse on hydrogen, and so bringing nuclear hydrogen together is a natural fit in evolution. And as many of you also know, if you're coming from industry, there is now just such a renaissance in nuclear, and that has now really spilled into hydrogen as contributing significantly to net zero. So welcome to Ontario Tech, and we're delighted to see you, and I'm certainly looking forward to a very interesting panel. And now I'll pass it to Stephen Murphy.
Let me also welcome everybody here today. It's nice to see everyone. Good afternoon. It's turned into a beautiful day. Thank you for joining us here in person at Ontario Tech University, as well as our international partners who are joining us, whether they be in academia, in research, or in institutes online. So welcome. We're delighted to have you join us this afternoon for our discussion on Ontario's capacity to lead in nuclear hydrogen and the pivotal role of nuclear energy in fostering a sustainable hydrogen economy. This includes leveraging Canada's existing CANDU reactor fleet and upcoming large and small modular reactor initiatives in the province. As we're all aware, hydrogen today is enjoying unprecedented momentum within the industrial sector, supported by decision makers on national and international levels. The use of nuclear energy for hydrogen production represents a path toward a greener future. It holds the promise of decarbonizing energy, providing energy storage solutions, and offering a green fuel alternative that can pave the way for a sustainable world. Canada recognizes the evolving role of nuclear technology in addressing climate change and achieving sustainable energy goals. It's at the forefront of development in SMRs and in nuclear hydrogen production, paving the way for innovative, low-carbon energy solutions. At the heart of this progress lies our university, a beacon of innovation and research excellence. Ontario Tech has earned the prestigious designation as an IAEA Collaborating Centre in 2021, signifying our pivotal role in advancing hydrogen technologies. We're home to the first ever copper chlorine hydrogen production cycle for nuclear hydrogen, built in collaboration with CNL. And within the past 5 years, Ontario Tech produced the highest number of hydrogen-related publications, as Les mentioned, with greater than 1,000 articles published in research output. We've produced more than 10% of academic articles and over 20% of all books, book chapters, and editorials in the subject matter field of hydrogen R&D activities in Canada. So we're really looking forward to this panel today. I'd like to thank the panel for participating and for agreeing to share your wisdom with us. And I want to welcome you all to our beautiful campus and invite you, if you are a visitor, to make sure that you have a look around the campus before leaving today. I'll now pass it back to our moderators to introduce the panel members.
Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Thank you again. So we're first going to hear from Ivette Vera-Pereza from the Canadian Hydrogen Association, and she'll be joining us online.
All right. Thanks, everyone. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here. I am sorry that I'm here only virtually. Ontario Tech is a very dear institution to me. Back in the days, my heat transfer textbooks were written by Professor Dinser and Rosen, and I had the pleasure of working with Professor Dinser and other professors at Ontario Tech for a number of years. First, when I was part of OCI, Ontario Centres of Innovation, and later through MITACs. So it's always a pleasure to come to Ontario Tech. My name is Ivette Vera-Pereza, President and CEO at the Canadian Hydrogen Association. I'll be talking to you about CHA and also our Ontario affiliate, Hydrogen Ontario. So CHA, Canadian Hydrogen Association, we recently rebranded from Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, and the reason we did this was to reflect the nature of the industry, how the industry has grown tremendously, and the scope that includes. So we have not dropped anything. If anything, we have added the whole value chain of hydrogen and to a simpler name. We are an industry association. We have about 200 members all across Canada from coast to coast to coast, and we are in the past couple of years adopted an affiliate model. So because energy and hydrogen as well, of course, is such a specific jurisdiction-specific topic, we have developed an affiliate model so that we can also provide value to our members with their region-specific topics and issues and opportunities. And of course, Ontario is one of those cases that it is quite a specific province, and issues in Ontario are different from issues in other provinces. We strive to be a unified voice for the hydrogen sector across Canada, and we mostly engage in advocacy advocacy, government relations, communications, awareness, education, and also networking and providing B2B opportunities to our members. A little bit more about us. So from the perspective of advocacy, we are quite engaged with provincial and federal governments, so we have been quite engaged with topics such as, for example, the investment tax credits, etc. So we host provincial and federal hydrogen days so that we can work with government and present the many opportunities that hydrogen brings. A lot of the times you will know that there's very little knowledge about hydrogen and some misconceptions. So that's a lot of what we do. We do also a lot of trade missions. We were just most recently at the Canadian Hydrogen Convention. That's a domestic event. And one of your colleagues, Rami, who's also one of my board members, was there with us. So that's also a lot of what we do, and that allows us to bring opportunities to members. And at this point, by having approximately 200 members, a lot of these business opportunities happen within the membership, which is really rewarding to see. Next slide. So just a little bit about our members. Of course, I won't go into details, but a number of members that are at that touch the nuclear sector. There's Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. You just talked about the partnership. There's of course Bruce Power. There's of course Ontario Tech. So we have members all across the hydrogen supply chain, from producers of hydrogen to end users, to those moving and storing and providing services to the hydrogen industry, and of course including academics and consultants. We have a very healthy base of academic institutions, colleges and universities, and they provide tremendous value to the sector. I wanted to, next slide, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Hydrogen Ontario. It's an affiliate of the Canadian Hydrogen Association. Next. So the mission of Hydrogen Ontario, each affiliate aims to support the local ecosystem, as I said. So the mission of Hydrogen Ontario is to support the industrial and manufacturing base in the province of Ontario as it leads Canada's efforts to create demand and to develop a robust hydrogen offtake market. So that is developing the market also in Ontario. And from a manufacturing perspective, we are blessed in Ontario. We are considered the cradle of the electrolyzer industry in Canada, with multiple players in the space and knowledge that dates back to 1905. So a lot of to be proud of in Ontario. Next slide. Just some of our members in Hydrogen Ontario. These slides are really hard to update because we are growing at a very fast pace. So if you don't see a logo here, I apologize in advance. Like I said, we are continuously updating this slide, but it gives you an idea of the types of members all across the supply chain, like I said, and from the perspective of where these members are in their lifetime as a company. You will see startups, SMEs, multinational companies. So it's a very rich environment, and very fruitful conversations are happening right now. Next. I wanted to very quickly talk about the potential for hydrogen in Ontario. And next slide. Of course, I'll touch. We would start with that intersection of nuclear and hydrogen, and that is what makes Ontario quite unique in Canada. So 55%. This is the 2022 data. Of Ontario electricity comes from nuclear, and the Ontario grid is very clean overall. So there's that opportunity, also considering the number of electrolyzer players in Ontario. There's opportunities for low temperature electrolysis. This is proven technology, and of course lots of room for improvement and for increasing in efficiencies, but it's something that could be deployed today. And then I just wanted to make reference to high temperature electrolysis, high temperature thermochemical production, which are at different stages of development. but also hopefully potentially very attractive for the province. We do a lot of work with partners at the Canadian Nuclear Association, and I think one of our colleagues is here with you today. Also with CNL, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. So trying to make sure that that value proposition of hydrogen and coupled with nuclear is brought to the table, and specifically Ontario can take advantage of that. So we're talking about potential for hydrogen in Ontario. Next slide. So this is interesting, and I just wanted to give you a quick overview. 7 hubs in the U.S. have been approved to receive funding. One of the hubs just touches Ontario, it's just south of us. That's the Midwest Hydrogen Hub, MAC H2 they call it. So tremendous opportunities for collaboration, of course, especially when we think about the next slide I'm going to talk about. But also it brings the question: will we be producing our own hydrogen in Ontario, or will we be bringing hydrogen from south of the border? It's an interesting question, right? So we really need to work hard so that we can also develop our own production here if that is where we want to go. Then the next slide. So the next slide speaks about that opportunity for decarbonizing one of the most polluting corridors, trucking corridors in North America, but also for partnering with the U.S. Imagine all that truck traffic potentially from Quebec, Ontario, and the U.S. So a little bit of data here that I have collected. The corridor supports approximately 10,000 trucks daily, and they carry commodities valued at approximately $380 million per day. So it's a very it's a very important economic artery for Ontario and Eastern Canada in general. And also from an emissions perspective, think about it this way: 10,000 trucks running, say, give or take 300 kilometers, which is a very reasonable distance, would emit approximately 3,000 tons of CO2 a day. So from a decarbonization perspective, it would provide lots of benefits to consider decarbonizing the 401. And this is only truck traffic. The next slide. I thought I would give you a little bit of an overview of projects that have been announced, and there's also actually others on the go that hopefully will be announced soon in Ontario. You see a little bit more activity in Quebec, and I'm just thinking about that 401 artery. But in Ontario, we are just going to be hopefully unveiling in the next little while the first public fueling station in Toronto, which is going to be at by the airport, at the GTAA Greater Toronto Airport Authority grounds. There's also a number of stations being evaluated, and I know a number of our members are also working on things that hopefully will be announced soon. And tremendous value in also in the transit space. There's projects on the go with Mississauga Transit as well. And with that, I just wanted to give you a little overview. The person you saw in the slide before is Maike Althaus. She's our Executive Director at Hydrogen Ontario. She could not be with us today, but my information is here, Maike's information is here, and please feel free to contact us if you want to get involved in the association. Thank you very much. Again, it's an honor to have been able to present. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mikey. So now we're going to go with Tom Wajda from Hatch, and he's going to be introducing himself. So.
Perfect. Thank you very much. My name is Tom Wajda. I am a hydrogen subject matter expert and engagement manager with Hatch. I just wanted to take a few minutes to introduce Hatch to everyone here, for those who are not familiar with the company. So Hatch is a Canadian employee-owned multidisciplinary services firm with over $75 billion of projects capital. And over 70, or just about 70 years of actual experience. Our local and international clients are supported by over 10,000 employees that are seated in 65 international offices. And in terms of our technical development, engineering, and project management, we do maintain a good reputation internationally by working in over 150 countries. Next slide, please. So this is just a cross-section of some of the services offered by Hatch. In particular, some of these may be adopted to climate change discussions, specifically for hydrogen. But within the business and engineering consulting, we do try to help our clients define their use case as well as their business case to make sure that you have a successful project. Within the technical development, we do work with research institutions as well as OEMs and maintain very good relationships with them just to keep a pulse or finger on the pulse of the industry and try to pair the best technology with the client that we are currently working with. In terms of project delivery, we do support at all phases of the project lifecycle. So that begins with the initial project building all the way through to commissioning and early operation. And then in terms of operation support, this is where we utilize our expertise with some of the industry-connected professionals that we have to basically leverage digitization or digital twinning for process optimization, as well as support thereafter. And I wanted to include just a cross-section of some of the projects that we've worked on recently. So starting in the top right is the Bécancour facility in Quebec. For some period of time, this was the largest electrolytic hydrogen generation facility with PEM electrolyzers in operation. Hatch actually worked on the integration of the equipment, so mainly the piping, mechanical, and HVAC systems. On the top left, maybe difficult to see, but that's the calcination facility in Australia. Here, Hatch worked on the hydrogen distribution throughout the plant, and in particular the compression, storage, and letdown. The bottom two images are conceptual drawings of plants or feasibility studies that we have also completed. The bottom left is a 100 to 400 megawatt facility with offtake in liquid or gaseous form. And then the bottom right is a blending and co-firing facility that's approximately 20 megawatts in size. Looking forward to the discussion today. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And now we'd like to hear from you, Chris.
Sure, thanks. First of all, just a thank you to Ontario Tech for hosting us here today, Ontario Tech being an affiliate member of the CNA, but also really happy to be up here with the Canadian Hydrogen Association. We together, along with Energy Storage Canada, which is the association representing long-term energy storage technologies, have formed something we're calling the Complementary Low Carbon Technology Initiative, which is really a means of advancing those technologies that are not yet at market, but together could represent a major shift in how we advance the energy transition. So for nuclear, we're talking about SMRs not being at market, nuclear obviously being very established. So who is the CNA? Very quickly, Canadian Nuclear Association, we represent more or less about 100 companies across Canada, some in the US. We've been around about 60 years, and we are the national voice of the nuclear industry. Do work in government relations, stakeholder engagement, such as things like this, and then a lot of media and public relations work, which is my line of work. My position is the Vice President of Communications and Member Engagement at the CNA. But rather than talk too much about the association, I'm just going to spend a couple slides talking about the Canadian nuclear industry writ large, because I just want to make sure we have a baseline understanding of what the nuclear industry looks like and what the numbers are just when we're talking about it. So if we could go on to the first slide. High-level numbers, the industry directly employs about 76,000 people across the country. This was a number from 2019. We're doing an updated study. Preliminary numbers suggest we're up by about 15% since then, and even accounting for COVID. So this is very strong growth within the nuclear industry. Represents about $17 billion in GDP, about $1.5 billion in tax revenue. and overall across the country generates about 15%, give or take, of Canada's electricity. Of course, that's very different here in Ontario, where it's really between 55 and 60%, more or less. The other province currently generating electricity from nuclear is New Brunswick. On the next slide, I think we have show the 4 nuclear power stations currently operational, large-scale nuclear power stations currently operational in Canada. 2 of them very close to here, Pickering and Darlington. The other one at Bruce, which is one of the largest nuclear power stations on the planet, and then the other one at Point Lepreau in New Brunswick. These are all, if you go to the next slide, I think it's CANDU. These are all CANDU reactors, which you've probably heard of. CANDU is a homegrown nuclear power technology that uses unenriched uranium to generate power. So this is unique. Canada has exported CANDU technologies to several countries around the world, in Europe, South America, and Asia. And Canada is actually currently going to be working with Romania on both refurbishment and new build, potentially of CANDU reactors in Romania. So CANDU remains very relevant. And potentially, if we're looking at new large-scale builds in Canada, CANDU obviously could be a competitor when utilities are making a choice of what to build. But really, when we're talking about hydrogen, we're often talking about SMRs, and a lot of the talk in nuclear these days is about SMRs. Canada was really an early mover in at least discussing SMRs on the global stage and how the country was going to take advantage of this opportunity. And a lot of this began back in, I believe, 2018 with what was called the SMR Roadmap. This was a collaborative effort between industry, academia, and government at the time, which then grew into a much larger discussion with the SMR Action Plan, which included Indigenous groups, labor unions, rural communities, and so on. And out of that came more or less the structure of a plan that Canada could capitalize on its nuclear expertise to deploy SMRs in 3 distinct ways. First is just for on-grid power. Second is for providing electricity and potentially heat for off-grid smaller communities, perhaps northern communities. And the third, which I think is most relevant to the discussion today, is for industrial purposes, both using heat and power for industrial purposes, either on the grid or off the grid and behind the fence. And so there are really projects underway in all 3 of these streams at the moment within Canada, and we're pretty excited about those. So on the next slide, and the last one, is what's happening on Ontario specifically, because I mean, I like to talk about Canada as a whole, but I know we're supposed to be talking about just Ontario today. The most exciting thing in terms of the SMR world is that the first SMR in the G7 at least is expected to be built not very far from here at all in Darlington around 2028 or 2029. This is the GE Hitachi BWX 300 SMR. So actually not that small. When we talk about small modular reactors, 300 megawatts is not that small. But BWR means boiling water reactor. X means it's the 10th in a generation of technologies that GE Hitachi, or GE rather, has been developing over the past, let's say, 60, 70 years or so. So it's a mature technology. It's just a smaller version of it. OPG expects to build ultimately 4 of these at Darlington. That same technology has been selected, at least, or expected to be deployed in Saskatchewan in the early 2030s by SaskPower, and very recently, Capital Power, this is a large utility in Alberta, signed a framework agreement with OPG to explore deploying the same reactor again in Alberta for Alberta to enter nuclear power generation at all. Then down south, the Tennessee Valley Authority is also looking at the same one, and then over in Europe, Estonia, Poland, also looking at that BWX 300. So that points to really Canada's leadership role, building that first of a kind, because it's a major risk. It comes with a lot of pressure to make sure that we as an industry deliver on that promise, because if the first of a kind fails, then the second of a kind might not even happen, and then the nth of a kind will not become that incredibly cheap and reliable source of heat and power that we all hope that SMRs can become. So that project, which is really undergoing licensing right now, but pre-construction activities are already underway. If we can deliver that on time and on budget, 2028, 2029, then I think Canada's in a good place. But speaking of on time and on budget, the largest infrastructure project in Canada today are the refurbishments of the Darlington and Bruce facilities here in Ontario. So the $26 billion project that has been ongoing since 2016, which is not only on budget but is ahead of schedule. And these two plants are also increasing their output through these refurbishments. So this is really good news for the industry, because not only is it proving large-scale projects in the nuclear industry can be done on time, but it is also ensuring that we have an active and trained workforce here in Ontario that is working on an active nuclear project prior to simply building a new one. A lot of the problems that we saw down in Georgia, for example, with the Vogtle plant, which finally came online, was that they simply had not built a new plant in generations, and so they were starting from scratch. We are hoping that this workforce that we have right here, and of course all the new workers that are coming out of places like Ontario Tech, will ensure that we're able to hit the ground running with any new projects. And then the last point, two last points. Bruce Power has also announced the intention to build an additional 4.8 gigawatts of nuclear power production at its site over in Bruce. So this could be only large-scale conventional, it could be SMRs, it could be a mix of the two. Really, that's going to be up to the economics. But with 4.8 gigawatts, I think large-scale nuclear is to be expected. And so this is a long time in the future. We're really looking at 2040 for these kind of things to come online. But given the degree of expected electricity demand in the country, in Canada, we're expecting 2 to 3 times increased electricity demand by 2050. We need that kind of large-scale production in order to meet that demand. When we say 2 to 3 times, the 3 times takes into account things like hydrogen production, for example, which could drive up that electricity demand even higher. So really it depends on a lot of things. The last point I'll make is there are a couple of smaller SMR projects happening in Ontario. One is over at Chalk River. This is the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. They are building, last I heard, it was 15 megawatt SMR on site as a proof of concept to provide heat and power, potentially heat also to the military base next door. And this is a really proof of concept for how an SMR can be used in a microgrid or in an off-grid situation. There are also early discussions over at McMaster to build a new reactor there. As you might know, they have one of the oldest nuclear reactors in the country, and build what they're calling a nuclear community project, whereby they would build a small reactor, use it to produce electricity, use it to produce clean fuels, including hydrogen and ammonia, and also provide district heating for a new set of facilities there. This is a project that is in the very early discussion phases, but they hope they can pull it off and then use that as an example to, for example, a northern community from Nunavut or NWT who are saying, well, what does it look like? What would it look like if we built an SMR and say, well, come down to our nuclear community here at McMaster and we'll show you what this could look like and how it could all be integrated. So a lot of exciting things happening. Let's use the word renaissance, which is a word we try to avoid using because there have been lots of nuclear renaissances over the past number of decades, some of which didn't go anywhere at all. We're hoping this is a different one. And as I said, it's all about making sure that we can deliver on promises and not just make big promises. So, thank you.
Now we have Bill Smith talking about terrestrial energy.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Fantastic. Great to be here. Thank you, Ontario Tech and Hydrogen Association for having us. Always great to come to Ontario Tech. My office is in Oakville, but I live in Rouge Hill, so driving this way instead of that way is always a blessing. So invite me anytime, please. Going home and coming here is great. Terrestrial energy is, thank you, Chris, small modular reactor, but not so small. It is relatively large, so we start to use the vernacular advanced reactor. It's a liquid molten salt. You can actually skip to the next slide, please. There's a schematic of it. It's a liquid-fueled reactor. So CANDU systems, as Chris pointed out, they use solid fuel, as most reactors of the world today do. PWRs, BWR, the BWX, GE uses solid fuel. We use liquid fuel. First built in the 60s in Tennessee at Oak Ridge National Labs. So a small prototype was built. It was about 10 megawatt thermal, ran for about 10,000 hours, established the thermal hydraulics and physics that we all get excited about, especially you engineers, but got abandoned for other things, water-cooled reactors, solid-fueled reactors. There was a bit of ongoing research being done, and our CTO, his name is David LeBlanc, one of the founders of the company, actually from Ottawa, Carleton professor, I kid him, he used to have time on his hands as a professor, and started to develop the concept out of the molten salt reactor experiment that was done in the 1960s. And that formed a company about 11 years ago and decided to consciously chose to establish it in Canada for two reasons. One, great people. Access to nuclear talent was par excellence. Also, the vendor design review, which is offered by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, allows technology developers to go test their theories, their design, their concepts, their layouts even, against the regulatory framework of, in this case, Canada. And of course, Canada is a world-class regulator. CNSC is recognized by United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission as such. So you get that check mark, and that's what we've been doing for the last 7-8 years in Oakville, back and forth Ottawa, but with the CNSC to demonstrate the licensability of this technology, and that's what we have done. And that report, final report, phase 2 report, was issued last April, so it's just over a year ago, and that gives us the licensability checkmark. Doesn't give us the site to install it on. That's what we're working on now, and you'll see some evidence of that at the end of this. But if you remember anything about me today, other than I sat beside Chris and Tom, remember about the technology. But developed in Canada, high temperature, which gives us access to those industrial markets that Chris has talked about. Low pressure, which gives us a little bit different safety case. And the fuel, liquid, and it operates in a very unique way. It controls itself. So inherent safety is high because liquid, molten salt, gets too hot, it starts to shut itself down. The operator doesn't have to do anything to do so. The fuel itself shuts itself down. And finally, we've designed a system based on some foresight maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and we didn't know it at that time, but we do now, on low enriched uranium, so less than 5%. So our fuel form can be produced. In fact, we bought fuel from Port Hope. It's just not enriched. That's a chemical facility just down the street from here, because they make UF4 as part of making UO2 for other climates and UF6 for other clients. We bought UF4 in Canada, just not enriched. And we have a deal with Westinghouse, now a Canadian-owned company, in the UK to produce our fuel out of an existing plant. And requires some things to be done in the plant. We don't have to build a new facility to do so. They get enriched uranium down the street from Urenco, one of the richers of the world, of the Western world anyways, ship it to Springfields, and then mix our salt and send it to us in approved containers. So we don't have that fuel problem that's plaguing the industry, unfortunately, because of the Ukraine-Russia situation where HALEU, high-assay low-enriched uranium supply, largely from Russia, was cut off. So remember those 4 things: high temperature, low pressure, high inherent safety. You can flip to the next slide, please. And low enriched uranium. Help them forget what I've got on the slides. One of the things that, my first hydrogen project, guess when it was? You can see I'm older. It was actually in 1981. I was in charge of the hydrogen cooling system at Bruce. And hydrogen is used to cool generators. One, because it's relatively like gas, so it doesn't create a lot of friction with a turning electrode, if you will. And I recognized that, hey, I was in charge of the first hydrogen project at Bruce in 1981. Fast forward to 1995, I worked in supply chain, and I was commissioned to work on a study to help see whether we could convert Bruce Unit 3 to hydrogen production using electrolysis. My friends in Siemens would love to know that. And we realized, yeah, you can do that, but hey, what we could do with all this hydrogen. So in 1995, even the idea was there, but the use case wasn't substantial enough to bring it forward. So we quickly abandoned that idea. So I do have a little bit of hydrogen, and as a nuclear guy, of course, we're always chasing tritium, and we know a few things about hydrogen that perhaps we don't want to know sometimes, and how it finds its way through piping systems, etc. But we do have a background in hydrogen. I didn't think, and I'm still a bit skeptical, about our system being connected to hydrogen But I'm starting to turn that corner over the last couple of years. And this flexible energy supply that we talk about, at my household, I use natural gas to heat my water. I use electricity to do a lot of things. I still use charcoal to barbecue the steaks. And, I'm a hybrid energy user. And if you think of nuclear as being able to supply hybrid energy, so as Chris said, electricity, heat for some industrial process, could be anything from some petrochemical process to desalination, or in the case of the oil sands, to pump steam into the ground so they can extract it. They don't have to burn natural gas to do that. They can use nuclear heat to do so. Hey, sounds like a win-win to me. And then maybe you produce some hydrogen for the local truck fleet, bus fleet, locomotive fleet, which is what's happening in Calgary, for example. CP Rail driving locomotives around their switchyard on hydrogen fuel cells. And I think their next step, sometime this month, if I'm not mistaken, is to hook up 3 locomotives and haul a trainload, ironically, of coal from the coal mines to the port of Vancouver. Irony doesn't escape you on that one. They also will be able to haul something else, which is potash, which is in demand throughout the world to feed the rest of the world. So let's dismiss the coal irony with, hey, this is good for the world because we can get potash to the port of Vancouver and people in China and Japan can feed themselves. So this flexible energy supply that we started with, hey, the domain of nuclear is electricity, no question. The big boppers do a great job at that, as long as they're maintained properly and we can build them effectively, no question they have a role to play. Look at what they do for us in Ontario. But these systems that we're designing can play this hybrid mix much more effectively than the big guys. And because we have high temperature and we can deliver heat that's useful. And we can plug in an electrolyzer and use some of that electricity to make hydrogen to run the local fleet, or in the case of SAGD for steam-assisted gravity drainage or some of the things that go on in the oil sands, displace natural gas. And they can sell it. They can make money, sell it to through an LNG terminal to Japan or China or South Korea. So there's lots of win-wins in this sort of hybrid mix. If you go to the next slide, yes, this one. Sorry, Chris. We actually have a customer that's asking us to see how much hydrogen can you make, and we said we can make a lot at 195 megawatts. Times 2, because we designed for Darlington, although we didn't win. We were one of the 3 finalists. I like to think we were the silver medalist, but whatever. We were in the medals anyway. We designed a twin unit plant, 2 times 195 megawatt electric, so close to 400 megawatts. You can make a lot of hydrogen with that. And this particular customer, if you have an AI engine, you can put the cross-section on it, maybe get the shoreline, and you can actually figure out where this is. But I can't tell you where it is. It's somewhere. And it is a real piece of land. They're saying, hey, there's a market for this stuff. Maybe it's hydrogen ammonia transport, but there is a market, as Canada knows, and some of my colleagues in the wind business. I used to run the wind business for Siemens, so I love wind, I love solar, I love them all. Are eager to sell wind, hydrogen generated from offshore wind in Canada to Germany. If you look east, it's even more so looking to clean hydrogen sources, probably shipped as ammonia and used for whatever purpose in their countries. Eager to see North America develop those clean hydrogen sources. And I'm surprised, pleasantly so. I didn't think that would happen, but here's a customer that's come and said, I want to see how much I can make so I can see if I can make a buck selling it offshore. What's driving them, though, is when, and nuclear is not always an easy answer, when, as we know, how much, and electrolysis has got some work to do, as we do, on the cost side, and reliably. Can you do it reliably? And, oh, by the way, can I sell some of the byproduct, like electricity? Of course you can. And, you start to wrap those features around their head, then, they get even more interested, and of course I get more excited. So what I didn't expect to see in my nuclear career is my hydrogen 1981 project come back to fruition in 24, I lose track. We're actually looking at hydrogen production, not hydrogen consumption in a small scale in a generator. So that's terrestrial energy. That's what I bring to the table today, and thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you both. All right, so I also realized I hadn't introduced myself. My name is Morgan. I'm a third-year mechanical engineering student here at Ontario Tech.
Hi, my name is Malia. I'm a fourth-year chemical engineering student in Toronto at Metropolitan University.
Yeah. And so we might do about half an hour of panel discussion. How's everybody feeling?
Good.
Good?
You're the boss.
All right, wonderful.
You want to start? Okay. So we will have, since Ivette and Mike work together closely, we will have Ivette answer most of the questions here. So the first question is, can you tell us how does Hydrogen Ontario fit into the green transition, and what are the areas of greatest impact?
Already established that hydrogen has to be part of the energy mix. If we want to get to net zero, we need also molecules. Hydrogen can provide, it's a very versatile molecule. Ontario, again, for decarbonization of heavy, medium, and also light-duty vehicles, hydrogen brings a really interesting option. Also for the decarbonization of industry, as you know, ArcelorMittal Dofasco is developing hydrogen-ready furnace in a Hamilton location. So for the decarbonization of industries such as aluminum, steel, and also cement, hydrogen brings a very appealing value proposition, and we are seeing this already happening in steel. So it's not, pie in the sky in the future one day maybe, right? Like Bill said, all that knowledge that he had is being utilized now, and that's where many of us in the space are finding ourselves. So Ontario, again, there's the nuclear capacity, of course. That means that the grid is predominantly clean, as I said. So all of this is very low carbon. All of this would be very low carbon hydrogen value propositions, and also the blending with the grid. There is a project that started very modest, 2.4 megawatt electrolyzer from Hydrogenics back in the day. Now Accelera by Cummins, acquired by Accelera by Cummins. A small project that was blending into, I may be getting the number wrong, but 3,300 households, around that number. Project has received new funding from the Ontario government, and is proving the value of also blending into natural gas to help decarbonize the natural gas pipelines. Of course, the natural gas grid is, I'm going to say in Ontario, 3 times larger than the electric grid, so lots of room for decarbonization there. So I would say that in Ontario there's tremendous opportunity, transport, industry, and heating. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ivette. Now another question for you, Ivette, from the Canadian Hydrogen Association. Can you provide any insight on provincial and federal initiatives that exist to support nuclear hydrogen implementation and R&D?
Yeah, of course. So let's start with federal. The numerous investment tax credits that the hydrogen industry can tap into, of course. The clean hydrogen tax credit, that's specific, quite specific hydrogen, but there's also the clean technologies, the clean tech tax credit, clean manufacturing tax credit, the clean electricity tax credit, and the ammonia tax credit. So needless to say, it's a very complex environment, and when you're developing your project, you need to start thinking from the very early stages of how you structure your project to also the boundaries of the different tax credits so that you can maximize your benefits. And of course, for research, there's still SHRED, Science and Research and Education Tax Credit, which is it's been around for a number of years, and it's very attractive as well. for industry. And then on the academic side, the industry academic collaboration side, of course, there's NSERC, there's MITAX, but there's also the innovation pillar under the European Union. And the name is just eluding me. There's one of the different pillars under the European Union research scheme, and Canada is eligible for the innovation pillar. And I'll get you back with the name when it gets into my head. So that also applies here for a number of academics, because that speaks about also across the world collaboration. So provincially, like we said, the ISO has issued a funding call for, it was $15 million, a number of projects awarded. Of course, we would like to see a little bit more in terms of policy, and adding to that hydrogen roadmap for Ontario, adding perhaps timelines and a dollar amount so that we can execute on it. So those are some examples that I would cite.
Do you guys have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a good answer.
Yeah.
So Tom, this question is going to be directed to you. And again, we can maybe, if folks feel like jumping in afterwards, we can go that way.
Perfect.
Given your experience conducting feasibility studies for hydrogen projects, why should Ontario take steps to enable hydrogen production using nuclear energy? And as a follow-up to that, what are the demands and challenges in Ontario?
Great question. So I've actually been part of several feasibility studies that looked at exactly this challenge of pairing nuclear power generation and hydrogen generation. And I think Ontario has the right landscape, the right technology and workforce landscape to basically enable that. Right now, as some of my panelists have actually pointed out, we have the highest concentration of nuclear generated power from any province. So 3 of the 4 operational nuclear reactors or nuclear reactor plants are in Ontario. In addition to that, there's a continued interest for further development. So we do have institutions like OPG, GFP, and Bruce Power continuously looking at expanding their fleet across the province. So this basically produces a base power load that is very constant, and this aligns with what you would expect from the operation of an electrolyzer. And what I mean by that is with the constant power load, we do maximize production and therefore reduce the levelized cost, which is typically one of the more important feasibility study values that are produced. So keeping that in mind, there are also opportunities to use off-peak or surplus power for hydrogen generation. And that's where things like either chemical storage or underground storage also becomes more prevalent. Beyond that, the technological developments from nuclear reactors also coincide with SOEC electrolyzers, and that kind of encourages the leading edge technology from electrolyzers to be put into place as well. And then further beyond that, we have the thermochemical processes that may even be supported. However, that's still quite a ways away in comparison to the SOEC and especially in comparison to PEM or alkaline systems. When we look at the current demands, again, I think my panelists did a great job of listing every single project in Ontario right now. But the one that I think is the most important is the one at Pearson, which basically has the refueling station for light and heavy duty vehicles. And the reason why I believe this is the most important one is because there's public exposure to this. And I believe that's one thing that this industry is actually missing, and it's probably the same within the nuclear industry as well. So this is an opportunity to kind of showcase what the technology is, what are the safety procedures, or maybe some of the misunderstandings about how safe hydrogen is and how to handle it, really. So that, I think, is probably the best project in Ontario to show that. When we think about the actual demand, that project at Pearson actually has a very small demand. To reduce the cost of hydrogen, we would need a larger uptake in the industry. So again, in steel making, cement, or even chemical plants, such as ammonia production for fertilizers. That's something that would need to increase, and generally need to be interconnected as well so that you can kind of support the entire province with production. In terms of challenges, and I'll refer to my panelists here on this as well, I think the main one is really the timelines. The horizon for a hydrogen project to come into operation is much shorter than the ones for nuclear power plants. And really what we're looking at is maybe 2 to 3 years after FID to phase something in. And it depends on the scale, of course, and the technology and where the components are coming from. But maybe Bill or Chris can comment on the timelines associated with nuclear projects and what the expectations are, and maybe how we can reduce that.
I mean, when we talk about timelines for nuclear, we're talking about two distinctly different things. First of all, we're talking about impact assessment and regulatory review, and then we're talking about construction. Construction, I mean, that's on the industry, right? That's a problem the industry has to solve, is figure out how can we get things built on time and on budget, and that goes back to the question, what we're talking about in terms of workforce and learnings and making sure that you have everything you need before you start building, which has not always been the case with nuclear power plants. The design has not even been finalized in some cases when concrete starts being poured. But in terms of impact assessment and regulatory review, that's something that at least our association is very much focused on, working with the government to make sure we can reduce those timelines as much as possible. So all of that time spent before you even start construction. So in the budget that was released just last month, the federal government announced that they're trying to aim for a cap of 3 years maximum for the impact assessment review for nuclear projects. We are looking at 3 to 5 years right now, possibly up to 7 in some cases, so putting a 3-year max timeline on. Ambitious, but if doable, would dramatically cut down the timelines. Similarly, when we talk about the actual regulatory review, which is in the hands of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, here it comes down to the industry making choices about are you going to build the same thing multiple times and therefore not have to go through the full licensing process every single time, or are you going to build the same thing over and over and over again? And this is a choice that industry needs to make. And when I say industry, I mean industry writ large, right? Not any single utility. But we'd like to see the various utilities in Canada getting together and understanding that they all win if they start building the same thing, because they can then benefit from those lessons learned on either one. So I'm certainly not going to disagree with Tom that timelines are an issue. They very much are an issue, but in many ways it's a solvable problem.
Okay. And I think with progressed development and deployment, we'll basically have a little bit more alignment on that as well. Yes, Bill?
I was going to add, there's a nuclear plant in the United States called Palisades that's producing hydrogen today. So there is a capability with some thinking to produce hydrogen out of existing nuclear. But to your point, we're under no misconception that we're going to build a nuclear plant that's going to serve hydrogen. That's not going to happen in the near term. Ours is going to serve some hybrid mix, even though there is a customer who's come and said, I want to produce just hydrogen. As they've worked their way through the process of timelines, they said, well, maybe we need to figure out how to do other things, which is sell electricity, which is fine. We can do that. So, I'm under no preconceived notion that this is going to happen before the 2030s. This is going to happen in the 2030s sometime. And, we will be ready for it. That's the point. To Chris's earlier point, this is, I think, is really an interesting dialogue that will happen over the next couple of years and really might change the landscape of, IAEA or the environmental assessment licensing. Because what we've created in our vendor design review is a data set. It is massive. It's a pre-licensing data set. What they do in the licensing process is a massive data set that needs to be interrogated. It needs to be interrogated by operators, by regulators, by the public, by communities, and by ourselves to make sure that that dialogue is flowing. So what comes to mind when you think about interrogating big data sets? I'll leave it to your own imagination. But it does seem to be just around the corner, doesn't it? In terms of putting some controls on that, of course, being able to use that data, interrogate it in such a way as that the answers flow effectively and coherently back and forth between the parties. I think if we can do that, we can probably knock a year or two off of that process. And certainly we've built a digital platform. And you hear Tom talk about digitization already. And that allows that data to be interrogated. Now, we need to put some, as it turns out, the way nuclear works, we need to put some regulation in place to be able to interrogate it so we all agree that we're asking the right questions and we're getting the right answers. We're teaching the machine to respond appropriately so that the safety case is not compromised and we get the right cost answers and all those things. But I think we're around the corner from that convergence of technology, and what we've created in the nuclear industry is 60 years of history, which is in data in digital platforms, in OPG, our company, Hatch, and you name it. And how do we make better use? It's a really important question. It can really help us sort of decarbonize the world. Choose to do so.
Perfect. Thank you, Bill.
Just one other point on timelines, if you don't mind.
Yep.
One example of a different approach, which they're pursuing at Port Belledune in New Brunswick, a group called Cross River Infrastructure, is they're going to build a hydrogen production. Their plan is to build a hydrogen production facility with wind power and grid power first, and then when that gets off the ground and they see the demand, then they will move on to the second phase, which is putting in a series of ARC-100 reactors to then produce additional hydrogen for both export and use, on site at their industrial facility. So it's not a case of saying we're going to produce this plant, when it's up and running, then we'll start producing hydrogen, but rather flipping it around.
Yeah, it's strategic deployment in that sense. That kind of touches on one of the other points that I had with respect to the cost. Hydrogen does have some potential mechanisms to reduce the cost through the ITC, and I think I've mentioned that earlier, but for nuclear, especially for private applications, that is a challenge that we kind of foresee in the industry. But what you mentioned is a very clever way to kind of get around the initial investment for a nuclear power generation station. One item that, or maybe two more items very quickly, that I'd like to mention is also scale of projects and reliability. Ultimately, a lot of the feasibility studies that we have worked on tie back to what is the actual uptime of the facility and the costs. And both of these are connected because you do need the scale to produce a lot of hydrogen to support some of the decarbonization efforts, but then you also need the reliability to maintain that consistent production. So the technology is actually being developed a little bit further, alkaline systems being quite reliable, PEM not too far behind that, and then emerging technologies, SOECs, MCFCs, MCECs are also being examined. So those are kind of the challenges that we're seeing.
I was going to just add, industrial heat customers too are used to that maneuvering around reliability. They don't like it, don't get me wrong. They don't want to maneuver at all, just give me my energy and go in the corner until I call you. But they have, the reality is you need to maintain things. Sometimes things don't work as well as they should, so on and so forth. And some of their systems, some of their processes, it's really hard to shut down. A plastic plant, the stuff starts freezing in the pipes, and now you're down for 90 days. So there is some acknowledgement that they will maneuver around this, and I think as long as you're sort of straightforward with them in terms of the reliability, you can start to have at least a reasonable conversation.
Yep. So in conclusion, I do think that Ontario has the right landscape to promote these types of projects, and it can actually showcase this to the world, but it will take a little bit of effort to basically precede the demand for electricity with nuclear projects, and then develop hydrogen throughout with strategies like using other renewable resources in the meantime. But it can be quite the case study for other parts of the world where nuclear is an option. Okay, thank you.
Just to comment on Tom, Mike, Ivette, and I actually did go to the Pearson Airport, and it's on the process of being built, and it looks really amazing. So looking forward to seeing it when it's officially done. So
I encourage everyone to go take a look at it.
Where is it?
So this is just off of
the cogen plant?
It's in Mississauga, I believe.
So it's I think it's near the cogen facility.
Yeah, so I'm going on to Chris. So in your role as communication and member engagement, you have communicated and discussed with governments and policymakers and industry leaders and more. With that being said, how does the public perceive hydrogen and nuclear in Ontario? And what is your perspective on this situation going forward?
I mean, I'm going to cheat and say I'm going to talk about perception of nuclear specifically because that's my expertise. Nuclear and hydrogen, maybe Ivette would be better able to answer. But first of all, let me say there's no such thing as the public. I'd like to say this, right? When we talk about the public, what we're really talking about is a series of diverse stakeholder groups with very clear interests in many cases. And so whether or not they support nuclear is really down to what do they value. And what we see in our public opinion polling is, frankly, most people don't even think about nuclear at all. They don't even care about it, let alone support it or not support it. Most people in Ontario have no idea that most of their electricity comes from nuclear, let alone have an opinion on that. What they care about is affordability and reliability, right? And to a lesser degree, sustainability, if they are environmentally conscious. But that said, I'll give you the numbers in terms of public perception, just so we have them. If you look at them across the board, no, let me back up a second, because I want to talk about something else first. There's perception, which is what people think, but then there's also, and I've never found a way to phrase this perfectly, there's perception of perception. It's like, what do you think about what people think? And nuclear has a problem here, because we generally assume people are going to be anti-nuclear. A lot of us in the nuclear industry are even worried to say we're in the nuclear industry because we think we're going to get criticized or attacked for it. So this is perception of perception, and that causes the industry to speak with less confidence, speak less often, and try and be as invisible as possible, which frankly is to the industry's detriment in many cases. Because when you look at the actual perception, people support nuclear. I mean, across the country, you're looking at about, what are my numbers here, about 50% across Canada support nuclear. That doesn't mean 50% are opposed to it. Only about 15% are opposed. That other 35% just, they don't know, they don't really care. That 15%, 10-15%, that's pretty standard across most provinces. Those are the anti-nuclear folks, and they're not going anywhere. Nothing's going to change their minds. And if you look at public opinion, polling on any subject, you're going to find a steady 10-15% of people who don't like it because they don't like it for some reason, and that's fine. What we're more interested in the fact that already you've got 50% who support and then 35% who potentially could support. And so it's actually a very high level of support in general in Canada for nuclear projects. If you start to look more locally, then support levels rise dramatically the closer you get to a nuclear generating facility. For some people this might seem counterintuitive, but it's pretty obvious when you realize a lot of the people who work there live close by. And so they see the economic effects, the long-term economic effects of a nuclear power plant, which is long-term, stable, predictable jobs that contribute to their economy. Thousands of workers every day contributing to the economy. And something that they can rely on being there for decades or generations. I mean, we talked about the refurbishments at Darlington, Pickering and Bruce. This is going to add another 30, 40 plus years to the lifetime of these stations, which means that if you move there to that community, those jobs are there for that amount of time. And so nuclear equals good for you from that perspective. One thing I'll say, this isn't about public perception so much, it's about public understanding and knowledge. Some surprising numbers from our most recent polling. 17% of people polled in Canada said nuclear power is a high emitting form of power generation. There was another percentage that said it was low emitting, and then another smaller percentage that said it was a non-emitting source of power generation. So this speaks to a failure by our industry, again, because we don't like talking very much, to actually say what nuclear is and the real benefits around it. And so what we find, though, is the more we talk about nuclear, the more people learn about nuclear, in general, their support increases. It's not the opposite, right? The more they learn about nuclear waste, generally the more they support nuclear, ironically, because they realize that everything they learned about nuclear waste was probably untrue, because they didn't learn it from academics and so on. They learned it from pop culture or just what their friends said. The more they learn about safety, the more they support it. Nuclear being one of, by terawatt hour produced, one of the most safest forms of power generation in the history of power generation. And so, to answer your question really quickly, perception's not a problem, right? There is very strong support for nuclear. It becomes a problem when you intersect with cost of living. That's when it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem when they see their electricity bill going up and they blame whatever the most recent project was. If that was a hydro facility, they're probably going to blame the hydro facility. Over in BC, you know, Site C, everyone hates it, right? If it was a nuclear facility, they're going to blame that. If you're in Alberta, you're probably blaming wind turbines because that's what you've been conditioned to do. But you're looking for something to blame for why your prices are going up. That is a problem, and that's something that needs to be dealt with. We need to make sure that we do everything we can as an industry to ensure that prices don't go up too much. But the fact is, anytime you build a new piece of power infrastructure, prices go up because you have to pay for it, right? But we have to ensure that that can be kept under control to the maximum amount so that you maintain that public support, because public support then transitions to political support. We like to say that three years ago, you could not find a federal minister to say the word nuclear in front of a microphone. They just wouldn't say it. They would barely acknowledge the fact that Canada had a nuclear industry. Now you've got Canada's climate change ambassador, Catherine Stewart, going to the IAEA conference and stating Canada's commitment to tripling nuclear capacity by 2050. I mean, that's a massive turnaround. But that does not happen if there's not public support, because you need that public support to give the politicians that ability to say perhaps what they've been thinking all along.
Yeah, and this just going to your point, not to jump in on this panel or anything, but when you're talking about, like, we need to just be more open about it, we need to discuss it more. I think, like, NWMO did a really good job with Treaty 6, the Anishinaabe Nation there, on the nuclear handbook, just giving people the actual information and, like, yeah, just not being afraid to talk about it, I think, is really important. Now, and Bill, I hope you can jump in on this too. One of the questions we had that we were kind of, personally I was really curious about, and I think all of you could speak to this, is really, like, how can nuclear and hydrogen support each other? Because nuclear are really long-term projects. Like, what is the opportunity there? And yeah, like...
I mean, I want to jump in, but quickly, because I want the engineers to actually answer the question. I'm not an engineer at all. But I worked for a long time at the International Energy Agency, where our motto was all fuels, all technologies, because there's this understanding that no single technology is going to solve anything. And the analysis there shows that when you get to higher and higher shares of variable power generation, things start to get very complicated. Things start to get very expensive. You have to find a way to increase the flexibility of the system to the maximum degree to ensure that you are not curtailing resources, if at all possible, because then you're just throwing money away. And so from my perspective, again, as a non-engineer, marrying things like hydrogen and nuclear, but there are other, storage, long-term energy storage solutions, pumped hydro, battery storage, whatever it might be, there are other solutions. But marrying these kind of energy solutions together increases the flexibility that then allows for that higher penetration of variable renewables that frankly seems to be an inevitability in most, energy markets.
Yeah, Bill, I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Well, the marriage is the right phraseology for it. And I'm a strong believer in that, and I think our company sees it as a step towards our plant in the 2030s. There's going to be some interim steps to get us there. I take exception to those single point solutions all the time. And I see an agency here in Ontario that's saying triple wind and solar, not triple nuclear, by the way. And I'm thinking, guys, think about what you're saying, please, because when you're saying that, you're talking about tripling something else too. And if we can get people to think about that marriage appropriately, I think it would be a positive step forward for sure. And our hybrid energy system that we're designing now, then we started up, hey, this is electric power, and we're a convert to we need to deliver forms of energy to customers. And I would say, I'm going to play the pan-Canadian card here. What Ontario can do for the rest of Canada, if I may, just for a minute. So if you go to Alberta, and I lived there for a couple of years, and I've spent a lot of time there even the last 2 or 3 years, there's a lot of hydrogen being used. It's formed by the other SMR, steam methane reforming, not small modular reactors. So, you take natural gas, you break it into its constituents, and you release CO2 to the atmosphere, but you have hydrogen as a product. And you usually use natural gas to, fire some boiler as well. So it is an emissions issue for the oil and gas sector because they need hydrogen for heavy oil. why can't we start thinking about, and I think that's what Albertans are thinking about, why can't we start displacing that hydrogen with other ways of producing, or natural gas with other ways of producing hydrogen, right?
Yeah.
So there's the premise. And Albertans and Ontarians and even Ottawanians, federal government, provincial government, would probably agree on that. Sounds like a marriage that needs to happen, right? Given the current sort of construct politically. So let's say that marriage happens. What does Ontario have to do with Alberta? It has a lot to do with Alberta. Manufacturing base of this country is in Ontario, Quebec. Let's be real about that. There's, half the population is here.
Yeah.
And, it was built up around the auto industry and, various manufacturing. So Ontario, as an exporter of technical capability to the rest of Canada, let alone the rest of the world, is probably a good starting point. Albertans look to Ontario as engineers, as manufacturers, as people who come and build things, and not as some enemy in the East, although it's sometimes portrayed as that way. So I think Ontario, in terms of research houses like this here at Ontario Tech, being able then to export that technology to a place like Alberta, we can make maximum use of that resource. Now, if you think oil and gas is going to disappear, I'm going to tell you a story. Can I tell a story? I'm part of a research project at UHN, and I'm going downtown tomorrow, and I'm going to take the GO train run by diesel. It could run on hydrogen someday, could run on electricity, which is also nuclear, as we know. But I'm going to take the GO train, but I'm not going to drive because it's too stupid to drive in Toronto. I'm going to get there, and I'm going to go into an MRI for a research experiment. And I can't go into that MRI without the oil and gas industry. I can't, because the whole casing of that system is plastic, which comes from oil and gas. Now, all the people driving on their tires, as I go home tonight, 60% of what I drive on is from the oil and gas industry. So we can find a way, hydrogen and nuclear, of supporting other industries that are valuable to the world and help them decarbonize. That's my mission as I continue to work forward. How do I help you decarbonize but still do the things that are necessary in your sector of the industry? In this case, it would be oil and gas company. So I think Ontario has a sort of leadership role for the rest of Canada.
And just demonstrating that transition.
And being able to supply things that, just by the nature of our institutions, our schools, our people, our population, our manufacturing backbone, we still make some steel here, for example. We still make pipe here. We still make wires and cables, and other, BWXT. There's no better nuclear class manufacturing facility in the world than in Cambridge, Ontario. And let's export that to the rest of Canada and then the rest of the world.
Nice, thank you. All right. Louise, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask? So we do have a few more questions that it would be nice to ask around.
So maybe do like one more, I think, yeah?
Yeah, we could do one more. So we'll talk about the climate and environment. So we have in here, are there any areas of concern that can be proactively addressed through collaboration with industry, partners, and community stakeholders?
Workforce. I don't know. Workers.
Workforce, all right.
It's the easy answer. I don't have the solution, but that's something that I think all industries, not nuclear by itself, nuclear, hydrogen, other energy industries, need to be absolutely focused on, because this is something where we all win together or we all lose together. We need to make sure that we have the workers necessary to build the kind of infrastructure that we need for the state of the Canadian economy in 25 years. And frankly, right now, we don't have those workers. We have a lot of smart young grads, right? But we need a whole lot more of them. We're doing a workforce planning study right now for at least nuclear workforce out to 2040. Hope to release that in about 3 to 6 months. I'm going to be scared by the results because the numbers are going to be very, very big. So why do I say that's something we need to cooperate on? Is because we need to make sure that we are not cannibalizing each other's industries and therefore shutting down opportunities that might otherwise exist. There needs to be some kind of understanding that everyone needs to succeed together for something like the energy transition, which does not hinge on any one single technology at all. If you build 4.8 gigawatts of nuclear at Bruce, but you didn't have the workforce to build the new transmission infrastructure, then you can't get that electricity to where it needs to be, for example. And that's just one very simplistic example of the kind of problem that needs to be dealt with by having a lot more workers.
And maybe I'll add to that as well. In the hydrogen industry, we definitely rely on new graduates to basically come in and go through mentorship programs. So different areas of Canada that have actually completed some sort of workforce study about what the emerging technologies will require have underscored the fact that without the personnel there, they won't be able to operate multi-megawatt plants. So for example, for a 20 megawatt facility, you may need just a handful of people, a few technical operators, a few engineers, and so on. But for a more coordinated effort, once you get to 100 or even a gigawatt, or 100 megawatts or even a gigawatt, that takes hundreds of people to actually be on standby or in the field, fixing, maintaining, as well as operating the facility. So.
I mean, triple echo the workforce thing. So you'll be really happy about the demand side of the equation because you'll say, well, I've got a job for life, but you'll be totally frustrated by the supply side of that equation. And we see it, and we're a company of 80, so we're not trying to hire hundreds, but hire a couple people. And I'm proud to be an engineer registered in Ontario and Alberta, but do the associations and those kind of organizations have a role to play in this as well? Are we throwing up barriers to newcomers to Canada that are unnecessary? You see that in the medical community all the time, of course. Is it also true in some of the other professional environments? So we're happy that there's a bunch of students going to school here, and we're ready to help train them. But there ain't going to be enough. That's just the bottom line. And it's not just it's not just professionals like professional engineers or technologists. It's the trades as well. And I see some effort by trades groups, which is great, to tap into the other half of the population that they've largely ignored. When I worked at Bruce, there was one female in the trades, only one out of 3,000. So you see the reach into the other half of the population for trades. Nothing wrong with being a tradesperson. And it pays well.
Yeah.
The hours are great, and the working conditions are in Canada like nowhere else in the globe, right? So I think, government, industry, associations, schools have a role to play. How we're going to come together to do that, I don't know. I wish I did.
Yeah.
I probably could sell it.
Yeah.
Magic potion.
Sorry, is Ivette still online? Okay, no, okay.
All right, well, that brings us exactly on time. I hope everyone will join us for a networking session after this. But before we get into that, we'll do a quick Q&A. If anyone from the audience has any questions. Yeah.
How do you see the hydrogen market? What's driving that? And where do you see it? Like a lot of people are looking at electric cars, but I myself have very doubt about electric cars because of charging time and reach, like distance.
Yep.
So how do you see the hydrogen market?
So we kind of describe this as a chicken and egg problem because we do need the infrastructure to enable different decarbonization methods to exist, but you can't build that infrastructure if there's no demand, right? So it's a perpetual problem. I think one way, and I mentioned this earlier, is to basically start by having public outreach programs like the refueling station, right? That kind of garnishes a little bit of interest, and now your Toyota Mariah has a place to be refueled in a public station. So even if it's just one vehicle initially, it kind of helps perpetuate that. From the industrial side, it really starts with pilot projects where there is an interest in decarbonization through the use of hydrogen, and then that builds to complete change in how the plant operates, right? So there are two facets to this. I don't know if Bill or Chris would like to add to that as well.
I mean, the demand, if you follow the pipelines from beginning to end and refineries connected, that's where industrial demand does exist today, and they're using natural gas as the feedstock for that. So there is a demand on a relatively larger scale. They're not necessarily waiting for a nuclear plant to come and serve that demand. That's the issue. Some of the, if you look at the smaller scale, we did some work with one of the railway companies, of which there are only 2 in Canada, so you've got a 50% chance of being right. We could produce in a day everything they'd need for a year based on their current sort of use of hydrogen. So that tells me, well, nuclear is probably not a fit for that, but small-scale production, solar and wind and maybe some batteries and a little bit of gas, if you're okay with that, makes sense. But I think it is a chicken and egg. There is industrial demand, and there are customers out there saying, I'm willing to look beyond the scale of building a gas plant to your plant 5-10 years away and say, I'm going to fulfill that demand with nuclear, but that project needs to get off the ground.
And it all starts with first-of-a-kind projects, right? You need something to actually guide the industry that, yes, this is possible, here it is, here operating. So Bécancour, great example. It's been in operation for quite some time, and that plant offsets a significant amount of the carbon emissions at that facility, right? So it's feasible, it's possible. Being located in Quebec, where most of the power is hydroelectric, that's fantastic as well. I mean, competitive maybe to Ontario's nuclear contribution, but it's also green hydrogen that is being manufactured there.
The gas turbine guys are talking about being able to burn hydrogen as well in their gas turbines, and that's still burning, still be natural gas, but if you can augment it with hydrogen, then you get a cleaner burn, less pollution, less CO2 and noxious. Yeah, well, that becomes part of the issue, of course. Are you a nuclear guy, by the way? Are you a nuclear engineer? No. Okay. Well, go talk to one. We're chasing hydrogen around nuclear plants all the time in the form of tritium because it escapes. So when you try to transport it in a piping system, then it has the same tendency to find its way through the metals and into the metals and make bad things happen. So there is research going on to develop the right transportation capability as well. You can put it in the back of a truck, but the truck is unique and special. How many trucks like that will there be? Or can we build a hydrogen pipeline and start serving large quantities with a pipeline as we do with natural gas and oil today? And some of that is a chicken and egg situation as well.
Okay. So to add to that, this is where the deployment of fuel cells might actually be very helpful. Yeah. Personally, I've worked on a project for retrofitting railway vehicles with fuel cells, and these operated in Europe. Actually, one of them was in Quebec last year, running over the summer. Right, so there are applications, but then that has to have public support. The reliability has to be there. The infrastructure to produce the hydrogen. A lot of pieces have to be in place before it is an obvious choice in comparison. Yeah, partially cultural as well. Yeah.
They also want to deliver hydrogen to your furnace.
Yeah.
Someday, as in the natural gas stream as well. Possibly. But you got to go through all the pipes and the burner to get there. So there's maybe it's time we started a company and figured that out.
I'm a little bit worried that we're beginning to be the barrier between you and food. But I think we've just got one last question, and I'll wear a host hat afterwards.
Yeah, and just so that everyone can hear the question.
No, it's just good.
I can do that too.
Oh, sure. Yeah, nice.
Good afternoon. Pleasure to ask a question of this distinguished group. Just sort of as a bit of a backdrop, with respect to hydrogen production in Ontario, there is a plant being built in Niagara Falls right now, very similar in context to the Bécancour plant, which will make industrial volumes of hydrogen available here in Ontario sometime in 2025. I won't speak for my client, but that is the plan today, and it is proceeding very successfully at this point. On that basis, I'd like to ask a question of the panel with regards to the interaction of hydrogen and nuclear, in as much as part of the operating basis of this plant, it's in Niagara Falls, so it's not connected to a nuclear plant. It gets green power from Niagara Falls directly. But at the same time, it uses excess energy. It uses waste energy that would otherwise be either given away or sold or just lost in the fog. There are opportunities in Ontario. Bill, you were talking about baseload nuclear generation, which is the fundamental operating principle. There are times when the grid needs to reduce power. And one of the nuclear operators has facility to what they call blow steam, which is just basically waste the energy in the steam which could otherwise produce power. And one of the things that I've always had in my mind is, why cannot that excess energy not be tapped off even on an intermittent basis, because electrolyzers respond very quickly on and off? Could that excess energy not be constructively used to produce hydrogen on off-peak basis? It could, in my humble opinion, be produced either on-site, or it could be produced as power on-site, transported off-site to generate the hydrogen at another location, and therefore bring some of this power online. Part of what Bill said, I think, is, and Chris also, I think, is it's important, chicken and the egg, to make this market happen. The question about how is demand developing, demand will not constructively develop until supply is there. And certainly in the industrial side, they will not kick in and start investing the millions and billions involved to transition their operations to hydrogen until there is a reliable supply available. And I think that's part of the industry's responsibility. If we are indeed to try to kick off this and get demand going, we have to take the first step and make supply available. So I'd just like to ask about the interface between between hydrogen and nuclear on the electrical side, and any comments you have on how we could use that as part of priming the pump.
Well, the short answer to your question is absolutely yes. It is entirely possible, and we can start to conceive of those configurations of electrical generation, steam production goes to another process, possibly. Maybe high-temperature steam electrolysis being one of them, or some other high-temperature process for producing hydrogen we don't even imagine today, and the storage that might go with it. Our system, if I can tout our system just a little bit, I don't want to be selling to you all the time, but I'll sell to this one. Our system can load follow. Remember, because it goes up, it shuts itself down. It can also respond to demand and reduce its power if it needs to, or increase its power when there is demand. And what we see customers saying, okay, can I? We talked about co-generation. Can I use tri-generation? So this is a term that I first heard at the University of Calgary, believe it or not. Tri-generation being electricity for grid support, during peak or normal base load, whatever. And we say, yeah, we can do a little peaking too if you wish. Not so easy for big guys, just, it's a lot of energy to dump into this condenser. Been there, done that, it's scary. 2, heat for an industrial process, even down to the level of district heating. So we can isolate the system such that I could deliver, district heating level steam to the city of Calgary. And there's a couple of plants, one in Finland, one in Russia, that actually, and I think one in Switzerland, where district heating is actually served by nuclear plants. And 3, can we produce some other medium? I say, well, we could use salt, because we use salt. That'd be one way of doing it. Or hydrogen, compress it, store it, and then feed it back into a fuel cell, or a gas turbine, for that matter, if you still like natural gas, and I do, and burn it more efficiently and meet some of those peak loads. So those concepts are there. Is the demand for it yet? Not quite, but is it emerging? I think so, because the smart entrepreneurs see, wait a minute, I got 3 ways of making money here, not just one. And that usually attracts entrepreneurship to it.
Certainly from the integration of energy sources and their various characteristics and byproducts, significantly increases the overall system efficiency generally. And so
Bruce was ahead of their time back in the 80s. They were going to pump steam up to the energy park and make stuff, right? using the heat. Unfortunately, it was just a little bit ahead of its time. By the time it got there, it was hot water and so on and so forth. So we used to grow nuclear tomatoes, but that was cool. But it's not a concept that hasn't been around forever. And Europe and parts of Stockholm is totally district heating under the ground. Does part of it come from nuclear? Well, no, but the nuclear system does deliver the electricity so that they can do the other things with the district heating system. And look on Toronto with Enwave. It's district heating and cooling. Those concepts are all possible. And to Chris's point, if 50% of the population likes it, and the other 35 will learn to like it because they're getting their heating done, then it does sound like a win-win situation, doesn't it?
So that might be a good segue.
Sorry.
And just as a quick observation, here at Ontario Tech, all of those technologies are sort of central to our identity. Our IAEA Collaborating Centre for Canada is unique in the world because it is founded on the principle of integrated energy systems. It's the only IAEA Collaborating Centre that focuses on how nuclear fits with other energy sources. But just as important and just as relevantly, we have the country's leading research facility and testing facility for hydrogen vehicles, more or less independent of our other energy facilities. So we really do have an entire gambit. And if you're new to Ontario Tech, part of the exciting thing about research and innovation at Ontario Tech is it's always on the cutting edge. Having said that, thank you to the moderators who did a terrific job, and that was great. Thank you, of course, to our panelists. Thank you to the audience. Thank you for our sponsoring companies, Terrestrial and the NCNA. And hopefully you will come to more events over the next 6 months, and it will be a lot. So thank you for coming, and please go enjoy food.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. That was good.